Hello, hello, hello. How are you? Um, I am a little bit frazzled. I was a little like off kilter for the day and getting started, but I'm here. I'm ready to get into it. Um, see here. Make sure the comments are turned on. Um, Excellent. Okay. I am Dr. Nikki. I'm here. I'm ready to go. I'm Dr. Nikki. I'm a licensed psychologist, pleasure coach. I'm the founder and owner of Dr. Nikki Knows. I am a therapist. I'm not your therapist. I'm a coach. I'm not your coach. But I got a lot of good information that I want to share with you all today. And it always says take what resonates, leave the rest. Okay. Um, Today we're talking about what do you think we're talking about? We're talking about authenticity. Um, what's that got to do with me? What does showing up authentically got to do with me? I hear a lot of Black women actually talk about this. I think first of all that we have a lot of I have such a love-hate relationship with social media, if I will be honest. There are some things that the parts that I like is there are things that social media I think has brought into the broader conversation that is helpful, right? That's a good thing that people are using words and language and using concepts that are more psychologically minded, especially anything that's more inclusive. And sometimes, it's like the game of telephone. By the time it like gets to the masses, it's really lost its meaning, and you never know whether people are really interpreting what you're talking about in the way that you truly intended or in the way that it's actually supposed to be understood. And I think authenticity is one of those. I think authenticity is made especially distorted because of social media, right? Like it gives us a really false sense that we know people that maybe we don't in real life because we get to know versions of them. And then that version of them is what we think is true. And maybe not. So then you add in the layers of Black womanhood and all of the intersections and all of the craziness that is. And you can see how really and truly there aren't a lot of spaces where Black women get to show up as their authentic self. And then what does that mean for how you get to advocate for, understand what you want, really articulate your desires and needs? And so today we're really getting into that. We're going to talk about what Black women need in terms of authenticity and why that's so important. So, if you're here with me, drop in the comments like what you think authenticity is. So, I think that's a really great place to start. I'm going to tell you what I think authenticity means. And it's really quite simple. It is that you have an awareness of what is true for you, what matters to you, what you value, who you are. It is the version of you when the lights are off and nobody else is around, there's no need to perform. You're not responding or reacting, you are just being. Now, if you think about the reality of our current society, especially here in the US, how much time do you actually get to be alone? How much time do you have to sort of sit and be really reflective? How much of you how many of you have really developed a practice where you honor that for yourself? I will be honest and say I get to do it more than the average person, and that's because I work for myself and I work from home. And that is not to say that there's some more superiority around that. It is to say that most of us are working. There are many people that are parents or caregivers in some way. If you're partnered or in a relationship, You have other responsibilities outside of your career that connect to your community or other interest things that you value. And it's hard to find moments to really sit in stillness with yourself. I have all my thoughts and beliefs, political ideas about me thinking that's intentional and all of that good stuff. But you can then start to really, if you sit down and really do like an audit of your life, like a typical week in your life, and how much time you actually have to yourself, to be really tuned into yourself, to check in, to see, like, girl, who are you at this age and stage? What do we still like those things? What do we, I don't know. Have our values changed? That requires intentionality. Nobody is going to carve out time for you to do that. And there are many people that are benefiting from you not doing that. Because what I have found in my work with my clients is the more you lean into your own authentic self, right? And then you start to find that alignment with the internal self, with how you show up in the world, that ruffles a lot of feathers. That is uncomfortable for a lot of people because a lot of the relationships that you have, a lot of the spaces that you're in where you contribute, where your presence matters, is a performance. It's a masked version of you. And the people around you, people that are connected to you in those spaces, deeply, deeply benefit from that performance. They want the onstage you. Okay. They want Sasha Fierce. They do not want Beyonce Giselle Knowles. Okay. Think about it in those terms, right? And here's why I connected. Here's why I talk about that so much. I think of any cohort of people on the planet, um, Black women should be in line first for a sabbatical in life. Black women should be in line first for time off, paid, highly well compensated time off, time out, because there are so many individuals and systems that benefit from our performance, that benefit from the way that we show up. Now, oftentimes we're showing up in a way because we have to create the ways for our own survival. But there's no way for you to constantly be in relationship, having to negotiate around systems of power with regard to race, with regard to gender, with regard to sex, sexual orientation, class, all of those things, all of these systems of power. And Black women are not in control in any of those settings, right? And so you're in your day in and day out experiences, you're negotiating that, right? If you think about how many hours a week you're at work, and if you work in corporate America, if you work in any space in which the other people around you do not look like you, experience life like you, have the same cultural background and values as you, then you are performing. I worked in academia for 17 years total. And I worked in corporate healthcare for a couple years before I started working for myself. And I can honestly say this is the truest version of myself that I have known in my adulthood. And I'm able to say that because I've also had to do a lot of intentional therapeutic work to find out who she is, what we do, right? And I think that that is a it's a benefit that I have. It's a privilege that I have. I want to live in a world where it doesn't have to be a benefit. And that is why I push this experience of unmasking, being unmuted, talking, speaking from your authentic self. But the precursor to that is to know who your authentic self is, right? So let's say you've done that work. Let's say you really are clear about who you are, what you want, what you value, what you appreciate, what lights you up. Do you see where I'm going? Right? So now we can talk about pleasure. So the reality is, we spend a lot of our lives negotiating patriarchy. And so, even in our experiences around sex and pleasure, And not just, I always talk, let me slow down and back up a little bit. Because you hear me talk about pleasure, and I do that intentionally. I include erotic pleasure. I include sexual pleasure for sure. It's high on the list. But I talk about pleasure more broadly. I use that term as a more holistic term because, well, lots of reasons. But one of the things that I think I have come to no, that I know that I've come to understand is as I've aged, what erotic pleasure I've had access to, time for, interest in, has shifted and changed because of my other responsibilities, because of um, other changes in my body, because of changes in who I am, right? And in being my authentic self, um, experiencing erotic pleasure and sexual pleasure has changed for me. And so as I noticed that that was happening, I had to have a real important internal conversation. And that was and so is my only connection to pleasure is through erotic pleasure and sexual pleasure. And that's not happening at the same ease and frequency and accessibility as it used to for me in my 20s and 30s. Does that mean I'm like agreeing to have less pleasure in my life? If my sense of erotic and sexual pleasure is only related to partnered interactions, which ties into the live from last week, right around masturbation and self love and self pleasure, right? So when we talk about pleasure, why I talk about it is because I think it gives you the best opportunity, the widest playing field, the biggest platform, right? For you to have a life that is not only joyful and lights you up and is fulfilling, but that can include erotic pleasure in addition to other forms of pleasure. So that is why you hear me use that term specifically. So to go back to this sense of authenticity, if you are performing, if you are being a version of yourself that has to be limited, that has to be packaged in a certain way, that has to be careful about the words that she uses, that is negotiating other people's needs, that is creating your own sense of safety in a space by making sure you're aware of everyone else's needs and um not defying those or getting in the way of those, right? That's what a lot of your day-to-day life is if you really sit and think about it. And so if you're doing that, what is the likelihood that you have a really good idea and understanding and embodiment of the things that light you up, of the things that bring you pleasure? Huh? What was that answer? Probably not very good, right? Um, the vast majority of folks in the US have very little, um, hardly any comprehensive, but very little just foundational um, education around sexual health and reproductive health. And so a lot of what I see with my clients who are in their 30s and 40s, Black women clients who are coming to me to work around sex, pleasure, um, is that they had like this time in their life, right, in their teens or 20s, where they were starting to get to know themselves sexually, where they were exploring themselves sexually. More often than not, that came through partnered experience, right? And if we're talking about heterosexual women, a lot of what we're taught in our teens, early 20s, some of us through our 30s, is that we need to be sexually appealing to the male gaze. We learn a lot about who we are as sexual beings through our relationships with men. Let me know in the comments if that's true for you or not. I know it was true for me, right? This whole idea about body count, this whole idea about when should you have sex, this whole idea about like, did you do this? Did you have oral? But not like all of these sort of little little metrics that we use to sort of police sexuality. All of that is because of patriarchy. All of that is through a partnered sexual lens. And so if you've only experienced that sort of period of exploration in the early part of your life, and maybe you get married and you're partnered, and maybe you and your husband, your partner, that you have a satisfactory, enjoyable sex life. But if you never revisit that in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, and you're spending so much of your time with the output of the performing, right? If you're a parent, it's like being mommy. When you are a caregiver, you're in a role of thinking someone else's needs. When you're at work, there's certain expectations around professionalism, all of that other stuff. And then you a whole sexual being. You're a whole ass sexual being. And that to me is the importance of the uh, relationship between authenticity and pleasure. To me, they go hand in hand. Really knowing who you are, what you want, what you need to feel safe, what are the psychological needs you have to experience intimacy, what does your body like and body need, what are you curious about. You have to be able to have a real solid sense of self that is disconnected from other people's needs, expectations of you, right? That allows you to be able to live in that, to then explore that, to then appreciate that. And the beautiful thing that I have experienced personally, and that I also see in my clients, is there's this really beautiful, the word is reflexive relationship. So a cycle, right? So the more that you lean into your authentic self and experience pleasure that feels authentically aligned with you, the more you want of that. And that actually creates more empowerment and desire and motivation for you to show up more authentically. And then you have this expansion of who your authentic self is. And that leads to an expanded sense of pleasure. And it just builds on each other. So it's a really positive, energetic cycle. But it does require you to slow down and get quiet and get centered and be honest with yourself about who you are authentically, right? Now, that doesn't mean that. I think the other thing that I want to sort of move on to is like authenticity means you have to have it all figured out. Like there's some plateau, right? No, that's not what I mean. In fact, I think the best humans are the people who experience life as curiosity and people who are open to growing and expanding and knowing when you need to let go of old parts of yourself and knowing when to you need to embrace newer versions of yourself, right? So that we should be constantly evolving. But the way my evolution looks is not the same as your evolution. And that is the beauty. We're supposed to be these individual beings in interdependent relationship with one another. And so the more that you sort of like the regress to the mean, as they would say in statistics, right? The more like the norm becomes your identity, the less distinction you have, the less sort of individuality you're willing to fully show up as, then that also dulls your sense of pleasure. That dulls, that limits what you have access to. And I'm not about that. I've always been an outlier. I've always been a nerdy, slightly odd, a little bit quirky kid. I was that girl. And so maybe some of this comes easier to me than maybe other folks, but I've also been in a space where wanting to be liked and wanting to be valued and appreciated, wanting to be recognized for my contribution, that certainly matters to me, right? And so sometimes in negotiating that sort of psychological need for acceptance and belonging and connection along with the experiences that I talked about a while ago in terms of being a Black woman and the need to, out of your sense of psychological safety, sort of show up as a version of yourself, right? In professional spaces, in workspaces. Um, all of that starts to sort of really distort. And so, what I'm talking about is I want to celebrate and champion and encourage and empower you to be unapologetic about creating a little niche for yourself, right? To really find that pocket in your own universe for your authentic self. And if, as you're listening to me, the question of, well, who am I authentically comes up, like, what does that actually mean? If that keeps coming up for you, then that's a beautiful place to start. Like the curiosity around that, not judgment, not evaluation, not shame, but genuine curiosity about that. That's a beautiful adventure for you to start to go on, is to say, like, well, I don't know, who am I? Like in the dark when nobody else is around. Like, and how much distance is there between that version of me and the version of me that the rest of the world gets? And bonus question, what do I need to do to start to bring those versions of myself closer together? Because the more you have to sort of work to be this masked performance version and then hold true to this authentic internal version, you're expending a lot of energy and not only room for pleasure either, right? So how much more in alignment can these two pieces be, right? So that actually is I sort of as they say, jump the gun. That really is yeah. Let yourself unfold. That is your pleasure practice for the week. It is to answer those questions, right? Do I know who I am authentically? How different is she than the version that most of the rest of the world gets? And three, how do I bring those two things in closer alignment if they're not as aligned as I want to, right? I have a really wonderful tool. It's been over here in the background. It's called the Pleasure Pursuit, and it is a 52-week planner and journal that is designed to really help you tap into that. It is designed specifically for high achieving Black women who spend so much of their lives nurturing, giving, performing, showing up, achieving, slaying, doing the damn thing, and maybe in all of that have lost their sense of excitement, their zest, their access to their own internal sense of pleasure. And so in the Pleasure Pursuit, which is available for sale on my website, drnikkiknows.com. What you do every week is I've laid it out for you, the pathway for you to be able to answer that question for yourself. So there is the planning part is a pleasure plan for the week in which you need to identify what your pleasure theme is for the week, right? Because listen, you've heard me say I'm a nerd, right? You can hear me talk kind of heady on, if you've been watching me for a while, following me for a while, you know I can be really intellectual, and I have zero shame about that. Zero. But what can happen is I can kind of get lost in the world of ideas, right? And so for me, being able to sort of not take things so seriously, to be playful, or to not like live up here from the neck up, but to be more embodied, right? For me to sort of challenge myself in a lovely way. So I have laid out these different themes that you can choose to sort of give you an operating sort of framework for where to start with this whole pleasure thing. And then each week you will identify a pleasure affirmation. What is the thing that you need to say to yourself to help empower you and keep you motivated to stay focused on what you want authentically for yourself? And then the third piece is, what are your intentions? Okay, so it's moving from idea into action. So what are your pleasure intentions for the week? And then the last piece is, what's your pleasure strategy? Because how's it go? A plan without goals is just a wish. Did I get that right? Somebody in the comments let me know. I don't think I got that right. But listen, as I said before, I live in the real world, right? And having a strategy for how you go about doing this is really, really important, right? Because you don't just go from not living a life that has pleasure and excitement and eroticism at the center to doing it overnight. Like if you could have done it like that, it would have happened, right? So your pleasure intentions, your pleasure affirmations, your pleasure intentions, your pleasure strategy, and then you plot that out, right? Add that here to a date. And then the journal part, because I am a psychologist and coach, I'm going to always ask you to really think about what it is that you're doing, to be reflective, to have that insight and that self-awareness, because that really drives the most important behavioral change that you need for yourself. And so there is, and I like to think about the journal, the reflection section, as like holding yourself lovingly accountable for what you've set up for yourself to explore more pleasure. And so it allows you to sort of think about, what was the experience? How pleasurable was it? Was it nice? Was it orgasmic? Was it like mind-blowingly amazing, right? The reality is we don't need peak experiences every day in our lives. Nobody can handle that. But we do like a lot of variety, right? And so for you to be reflective of that, and then why you gave the experience that you set up for yourself this week, the rating that you did, what was it about it? Right. And this is the way that you get to really see how, in alignment with that authentic sense of self, that authentic sense of pleasure that you want for yourself, is one indicator here. And then there is a real specific accountability check in where I ask you to sort of talk about or reflect on supports and challenges. Remember when I was talking before about other people benefiting from the performed version of yourself? Are there people in your life that are really actively getting in the way of you experiencing your own joy and your own pleasure without any responsibility to them, without any expectations from them? Or what challenge? Or maybe how did you support yourself? How did you hold yourself accountable that you were like, no, this is a priority. I want this for myself. I deserve this for myself. And I held true to that, even when other things try to distract me. And then what were the challenges, right? So that we can be more strategic going forward, right? We're data gathering so that we can be more strategic going forward. And then the last bit of the reflections are, how did your pleasure intentions impact your well-being this week? Because for me, I will always be talking about your overall sense of mental wellness, your overall sense of well-being in relationship to sex and pleasure. You fully cannot have, no, you cannot have your optimal sex life. You cannot experience what's optimally pleasurable for you when you are not in a good headspace. And the way that you get in a good headspace, the way that you have good mental health, is through you, through knowing what you want, what you like, what's good for you, what you need to thrive and feel alive, right? So for me, they always go together. I'm going to be always far less focused on techniques and tips and toys and tools than I am about pulling from your authentic self. Okay. And then the last question is, what did you learn about yourself this week? Because to live in authentic alignment, you should be constantly curious about who you are. You need to know who you are first and foremostly so you can celebrate yourself first and foremostly. So it's those questions that I gave you to think about for the pleasure practice for the week are like, that's interesting. I'm curious about that. Dang. I really want to track that and do more for myself because I don't really like the answers that are coming up. The pleasure pursuit is the tool for you. It is beautifully designed. I love it, but it's also very functional, right? For you to go about this journey by yourself, for yourself. I love that. That is such a yummy thing for me when I think about black grown ass black women who have like very clear sense of selves and like do things their own way for them without compromise or apology to other people. They ain't hurting nobody. They don't need nothing from nobody, and they are filled with joy and positivity. That is one of my favorite things on the planet to see. Okay. If you have questions, let me know. Drop them in the chat. I'm happy to respond. What are your thoughts? What do you think about this idea of a pleasure practice, of having that sort of weekly accountability to yourself? And what do you think about how it can help you have a more nuanced, refined, detailed, joyful, curious relationship with yourself? I want to know. Because, I know things.
Let yourself unfold. Yeah. Let yourself unfold.
You like how I did that? I was so proud of myself for that segue. I thought that was real fire. So let's get into the question of the week. Says, Dear Dr. Nikki, I've worked so hard to get where I am. I can't afford to be soft or vulnerable at work. Talking about showing up authentically feels like a setup. What am I missing? That's valid. That is absolutely valid. I respect that. So let's get into it. I was a person, as I said before, I worked in academia for 17 years. I also then worked in corporate America for a couple of years. They are different, uh, but they all bring a level of toxicity when it comes to Black womanhood. I mean, everything about Black womanness is like scrutinized um and like critiqued, and possibly almost always potentially problematic in the environment, right? Changes to your hair. This is what I mean by everything. Changes to your hair, what clothes you're wearing. We all have like these experiences of someone always looking, wanting to be a part of the conversation, even if it doesn't involve them, right? Like there is just a hyper vigilance of Black women in the workplace. And when you show up authentically, right? And so, but let me get clear, let me like clarify, right? When when you show up in cultural alignment as your authentic self, a lot of those things are being perceived through a distorted white supremacist lens. Let's name the thing, through a patriarchal lens, and they are critiqued, right? And then they can be really used to thwart your success, to limit your upward mobility, to decrease your access to opportunities in the workplace. I will share personal experiences. I'm loud. You probably don't get a real sense of that from me, like in this like YouTube box. But I'm loud. And I also love to laugh, and I have a loud laugh. Okay. And I cannot tell you how many times in workplaces across my professional life that white folks it has made an issue out of me laughing. Like, oh, I knew Nikki was here because I could hear her laughing. Oh, I know Nikki's here. Oh, she's so loud. Oh, that laugh of yours. Like, I can't have joy. Like I can't have joy. That is what I mean about the scrutiny, right? And hypervigilance and being culturally aligned, right? Um, Talking in the hallway with another Black woman, hell, even sometimes another colleague of color, gotta stop. Oh, what are you all up to? What are you plotting? What are you scheming? I know there's somebody watching this. I know you have heard that. I know I'm not the only one that's had that experience. And so there's that thing. I was talking to my best friend about this the other day, too. That like sort of fake laugh that we learn to give. Like like we do it automatically because all of that is hypervigilance that you internalize as well, because that is a threat to your sense of safety. And you could argue with your mama about that. If it's not a place where you feel like you can just be yourself without repercussions, then the space you're in is a threat to your psychological safety. And for me, writ large, Black women in professional spaces that are not operated, owned by Black women, that also are Black woman identified, let's be clear about that, are spaces in which you are not psychologically safe. So the question makes perfect sense. I'll actually bring it back up so we can be refreshed, right? I've worked so hard to get where I am. I can't afford to be soft or vulnerable at work. Talking about showing up authentically feels like a setup, right? And so I just want to honor that where I'm coming from, I experienced that and I know what that means. And let me present to you the other side. and that is I reached burnout. That I had done so much masking and so much performing for so long in professional spaces that I was perpetually exhausted. I was anxious all the time. I was, I just felt like I was constantly on. Everything was tense, and my body started to reflect that. And if you're watching me and you find my content interesting, then chances are you are also aware of the impacts of chronic stress differently on Black women. You are also probably aware of the maternal health risks that are different for Black women. You know that this stuff impacts our bodies in different ways. And so the question that I pose back to you is, I get and acknowledge that showing up authentically off the riff, as they say, might feel very threatening. But you're not hearing me say advocate for you just to go out in the workplace and wild out and start cussing people out. That's not being authentic. That's not being authentic. What I'm saying is check in with yourself first. Put your needs first. And then start to look at, are there ways that I'm actually limiting myself before they do? Am I being harder on myself in this space than they are? Are there other ways that I can have advocates and allies and champions and sponsors and all of the DEI language, even though we don't do DEI no more? Are there other avenues for me to be able to take care of myself in this space than the ways that I have been doing it? Because what I'm asking you to also do is look at what the cost to you is. And is it worth it? I say, hell no. I got the hell out. It really felt like I was either choosing me and a life and a life that was worth living, or I was choosing that environment and the version of them, the version of me that they appreciated from. So that's the piece that's missing, right? I'm never presenting to you to do anything that is reckless and going to impact your livelihood. What I'm saying is, the more that you show up as a performed version of yourself, as an inauthentic version of yourself, number one, the more you lose sight of who you are and what you want for yourself. And number two, the more you really are leaning into surviving and not thriving. And I can't be convinced otherwise. If you can make an argument for me that you could show up every day and perform a version of yourself for 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week as somebody else, but you still are living your best life, please, please tell me how. Please convince me. Okay. So that's what I say in response to that. And what you do, the short answer is you start with practicing every day. You start by checking in with yourself every day. What do I want? What would make me most happy in this environment? What would make me feel safest in this moment? Those are the internal questions you start asking yourself. Okay. All right. So as we wrap up for the day, thank you again for being here with me. It's been a joy and a pleasure. For me, again, you can get the Pleasure Pursuit. It's a planner and a journal to help you get in line with what you desire in terms of pleasure for yourself authentically. You can get that at my website. The link will be in the show notes. And if you're interested in really learning more about, like, what are the tools that I need to engage in to be my most authentic self and really start doing this work, I also have a workshop that's called Unmasked and Unmuted that you are able to purchase and experience at your own time and place. And if any of that leads you to wanting to really get in and get personalized and curated work, you can always set up a consultation with me to work with me one-on-one. My website is drnikkiknows.com. Same thing as this YouTube channel. You know where to find me, but it'll also be in the show notes. It's been a joy and a pleasure, and I will see you all next week. Oh, so next week we are in the month of June. Like, what is time? Make it make sense. How are we dead in the summer? But we're entering the month of June. And the month of June, we're talking all about radical pleasure. Radical pleasure. So let's get into it, okay? I'll see you then. Bye.